Aloha and welcome to your introduction to the cells video. The goals for today are to list the type of molecules we find in the cell, and then also we'll talk a little bit about how cells were discovered. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our molecules in life. There were four types of organic molecules that we talked about in the last unit. We were going to go over them real quickly. They were the proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. Now the proteins were made of amino acids, and those are the ones that built us. So they're used for support, transport, and as enzymes, things of that nature. The carbohydrates were our sugars, and you can see the names here, monosaccharide, disaccharide, and polysaccharide. That tells us how many sugars are attached. And remember that the sugars were the main source of energy for life. We also have our lipids down here. Those are our fats and our oils. They were made up of glycerol and fatty acids, and this is how we stored energy. They were also important in certain cell parts like the cell membrane. And then finally, we talked a little bit about nucleic acids, and those were made up of our nucleotides, and these are our DNA and RNA, and those are the ones that store this hereditary information. So remember these four, okay? We're going to talk about them and where they fit into our cell a little bit later on in this unit. Okay, so this picture here shows us a little bit of organization and how we can kind of put things together. We started off and we talked a little bit about atoms, and we said that two or more atoms can come together and they can form a molecule. Now, these molecules can come together to form a larger molecule, which we call a macromolecule, and we'll see in this unit how those macromolecules can form organelles, which ultimately will form a cell. Now, a bunch of cells working together forms a tissue, and if we get a bunch of tissues working together, we get to an organ, and a bunch of organs working together gets to an organ system, and then ultimately that will take us to the organism itself. And this is kind of how we want to keep this organization together. So we start off small here with the atom, and we can get all the way up to the organism itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the discovery of the cell. Back in the 1500s, microscopes were invented, and the first microscopes were nothing more than a magnifying glass. It was just a lens that allowed people to make things look a little bigger. From there, they put a couple of these together, and we came up with a compound microscope. And in 1665, a scientist by the name of Robert Hooke looked at quark. And as he looked through his microscope, he noticed when he looked in there, and let me draw real quickly what it looked like, is he saw all of these little areas, these little boxes. And it reminded him of small little like cells in a jail or something like that. And so he coined this little thingy right here as being a cell, and that's the name that stuck. Okay, now a couple years later, Anton van Leeuwenhoek saw living cells. So what Robert Hooke really saw were the cell walls of a dead cell, and that's what cork is. Cork is a plant, and these would be the cell walls. And then Van Leeuwenhoek took some pond water, and he put pond water on a slide, just a drop of pond water, and then when he looked at it inside, he saw all of these little microscopic little bacteria and stuff like that, and he saw living cells for the first time. Now, people started looking at everything, they did all this kind of stuff, and in the 1800s is when we made our broad, sweeping statements. A scientist by the name of Matthias Schleiden said that all plants are made of cells. Every single plant that you see there is going to be made up of cells. Not to be outdone, Theodor Schwann here said that all animals were made up of cells, and therefore all living things are going to be made up of cells. And then another scientist by the name of Rudolf Virchow said that cells came from other cells. So these three statements here became very important, and they were very defining of our entire idea and the concept of a cell. Okay, so let's take a look at Schleiden, Schwann's, and Virchow's statements. They came together, and you can see down here that in 1655 is when Robert Hooke saw the first cell. Okay, Leeuwenhoek here in 1674, and then in 1683 saw the first living cells, and then in 1838 is when we had the cell theory proposed by Schleiden and Schwann. Now, the cell theory is the tenet for cell biology, and it has three different parts to it, so let's look at those first. The first part here says that all living things are made of cells. So, Schleiden said that it was plants, Schwann said that it was animals. The cell theory says that all living things are going to be made of cells, and that all of these cells are going to have some components that are the same, and the biggest one is going to be this DNA, the plans on how that cell is supposed to work. All right, The next part here is that cells are the basic units of structure and living in all things. So for something to be alive, it has to be made up of cells. It can be a single-celled organism, or it can be a multi-celled organism like ourselves, and if it's multi-celled, that means it's made up of many cells. And then finally, we get Virchow's idea here that cells only come from present cells. So cells come from cells. That's how they work. They can't spontaneously make new cells. They come from other ones. All right? And that's our cell theory, and that's basically the foundation of biology. And we'll be talking about all of these different tenets as the class goes on. Okay, that's it. Good luck in the lessons. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.